Welcome to another special edition of the Data Exchange Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Lorica, but today our host will be our managing editor, Jenn Webb, and our guest is Sonal Goyal, who I first met many years ago in the context of Strata Singapore, where I was chair. And at that time, Sonal was a speaker, but then she eventually became a very valued member of the Strata Data Program Committee. Welcome both to the Data Exchange Podcast, and take it away, Jenn Webb.
Thank you, Ben and Sonal. Thank you very much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Absolutely thrilled to be here.
So let's start with kind of a broad foundation question to get us going. Can you tell us a little bit about what data preparation is and where it fits into an enterprise analysis stack?
Right. So data preparation essentially is a very critical part of an enterprise analytics stack. And when you want to ask questions out of data, which is the analysis, the raw data is generally not in a form through which you can directly glean insights. So the entire process by which you massage the data, you get it in a shape through which all your questions can actually be asked. These could be broad things in terms of just getting the formats ready. This could be things like normalizing and standardizing the fields so that they represent the same entities in the same way. And there could be a whole lot of unification in terms of, all records belonging to the same entity being together. So the whole data preparation is essentially the part where after the loading of the data, where after the extraction of the data, getting it into the analytics stack, but before asking the questions, that's where it sits.
And so within the data preparation, which scenarios entail integrating data and building unified views?
So when we look at data preparation broadly, there could be, multiple challenges. One challenge that we see often is when enterprises want to get a holistic view. So as long as you are working within a single domain or a single, product line, let's say, for a customer, it is easy to answer questions like, what's my lifetime value? But the moment we step, and we want to get a broader view in terms of who are my customers across my product lines, who are my suppliers across my different geographies. So when you have data which is coming in from different sources, you have different interaction points with them. That is where a unified view of these entities becomes absolutely critical.
So how do you define a unified data view, which for our listeners is also sometimes called master data? Is that correct?
That's right. So master data is essentially, it is the unified view. What we do in this data mastering, which is part of the data preparation, is that so let's say, we have a customer which has bought multiple products from us. Now, typically what would happen is that these interactions with the customer would be saved across the data residing in the department or across a product line. But when we want to build out a unified view, when we want to get, understand the entire customer journey, when we want to do personalization for them, when we want to do recommendations for them, maybe we want to do segmentation and understand how our customers behave. And this is across the entire enterprise. So we, get these records of a customer together and we build one single entity out of that. And that is the unified view of the customer. This entity can then actually be tied up with the behavioral data. And then your facts and dimensions come into play.
So actually, Jenn, many of the things Sonal is discussing are, I would say, some of the most important things that companies have to face, right? So the first is finding data. So the whole extract and load is very important. But as she points out, the transformation of the data, data fusion, unifying data from across many different sources. These are all the subject of much activity right now, and I would say many open source projects and many startups. So while we read a lot about AI and machine learning and things like this, but really right now, I would say some of the more interesting companies are in this data engineering space, which includes data integration, which basically now seems to have two sets of companies. You have the companies who are doing EL, extract and load. So this would be companies like Fivetran and Airbyte, and then companies who are doing much more focus on the transforming of the data prep, and then data fusion, right? So as Sonal points out, it seems like one of the buzzwords right now is the so-called customer data platform, where companies are trying to get this 360-degree view of a customer. But as many of our listeners know, it doesn't take too long for a company to find itself using many different systems, right? So you can start a company today, and in 3 months, suddenly you're using 60 different software as a service for payroll, accounting, or marketing, all sorts of things. So it's really important to get your data under control.
Right. And Sonal, what kinds of companies, Ben had talked about a couple, but in your experience, what kinds of companies benefit the most from a unified view like this?
So typically these would be medium to large companies, Jen. Companies which have multiple departments, multiple systems, a lot of data to deal with, and companies, I think beyond just the size of it, one way to also look at it is what really, like, how data driven are these companies? How much do they really want to, what kind of digital transformation are they going through? Because even medium to large companies continue to, continue to generate a lot of data. But are they really looking at deriving maximum value from the data? I think that is the fundamental question which differentiates which companies need these kind of, preparation and analytics, and those which do not.
Right. And so in doing this, you're kind of connecting all of the data silos within a company. So you're kind of creating like a macro data silo. Who owns this in the company? Like, where is it best placed? Is it an IT kind of situation, or does it belong in the business office, or what would you suggest?
The consumers are definitely business, Jen. The consumers for this are definitely business. These could be many departments. These could be, these could be operations. These could be procurement. These could be customer service. These could be somebody who's actually running the P&L in terms of what kind of cross-sell opportunities are there. So sales and marketing departments as well. But in terms of ownership, I would say the ownership resides mostly on the data analytics and the data engineering teams.
Yeah. Okay, and go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, and actually, I think once you get to the point, Jen, where you're kind of unifying many disparate data sources, it becomes harder for these business teams to really do that on their own. And actually, there's something to be said about some amount of centralization when you get to this point. So I think one of the trends, Jen, that we're pointing out in our 2021 trends report, for example, is the rise of these metadata management systems, right? Which came out of mainly tech companies, so LinkedIn, Lyft, Spotify, Netflix, Uber, and I think Airbnb published, some of them even open sourced their metadata management systems. And yeah, so the goal there was to centralize, build some sort of data management system for metadata, and then a metadata management system could then serve as a foundation for many different data services. And naturally, something like that would probably be more of a data engineering IT system.
Right. And you kind of need it to be under like someone with project management level control, because you need to integrate it into your existing data stacks. And to that, Sonal, how difficult is it to integrate this into an existing data stack?
In terms of data mastering, in terms of data preparation, I think, see, data preparation essentially has to natively sit on the data analytics stack. We cannot be building, data pipelines, which again have to load or extract data and then push it into the analytics stack. I think the paradigm that something like a lakehouse proposes, which is that your data is
Great
there.
idea. That's a great idea.
Which is
that's part of our trends report.
For our listeners, you should Google what is a lake house.
Yeah.
So when you have the data centrally at a place, the tools cannot be far away. They cannot themselves be the silos. They cannot create new silos. They should sit natively within the cloud, within the lakehouse paradigm, or on the cloud data warehouse, and prepare the data there. That's what I feel.
There's that's why I think, Jen, there's kind of this in many ways, kind of even in the startup and open source project world, there's kind of somewhat of now separate groups of people focusing on extract load, and then a separate group of companies doing the transformation. Because the extract load seems to be maybe that's something you might have to have someone from IT or data engineering help you with, but the transformation increasingly, I think some of these teams might be able to do. Is that right, Sonal?
That's right. That's absolutely correct. So we have a very clear, I think, clear-cut roles in terms of, the extract and the load in terms of functionality, and then the transformation, and then the analytics, which is done by the data science or the BI teams.
And hold on, I'm sorry. Oh, so when you think about this emerging data, there are some hurdles that come to mind. So global companies that are dealing with countries that have different regulatory requirements, and then also different groups maybe formatting their data differently, or typos when you're trying to merge. What are some strategies for overcoming those hurdles?
So I would say that data governance, in terms of who has access, how well it is managed within regulatory perspective, is definitely something that has to be taken care of when you are getting data from all these sources and matching it up. So locality is definitely something that needs to be taken care of in terms of even broader analytics, in terms of broader extraction and load, and not just in preparation. In terms of format and other things, the tools ought to be able to be as smart as possible to take care of these formats, to match up and organize the data in a way that is the least cumbersome for the consumer, which is the data scientist or the data analyst, because their time is really critical. I mean, they have to get to insights very fast, and they can't be spending all their time in just preparing the data. So I think in that sense, a good support from the tools is definitely necessary. At the same time, I think one thing we also need to consider is that we need to be able to make sure that we know what data is residing, so that a lot of this compliance can actually take place. I mean, unless we have a hang of in the enterprise where the data really is and what access controls have we given to it, all the regulations, the privacy controls, the CCPA and the GDPR, really we cannot we cannot comply with that.
Right.
And by the way, in many companies, it turns out that analysts waste a lot of time just finding and validating data they can trust. And so, in many ways, that's kind of one of the motivations behind some of these metadata management systems that I mentioned. Because what those companies that built those systems found out is that if they can centralize and kind of have a nice, uh, trusted set of data sources backed by metadata, then their analysts can be way more productive because they can much more easily discover relevant data and data that they can trust, rather than everyone trying to find data and recreating the wheel and basically wasting a lot of time.
Right. It also seems like this notion of the unified view would kind of add into the idea behind the high quality data that people working in AI and machine learning are looking for. Are you seeing that application, Sonal?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing that, as Ben was mentioning, is that we've started having a lot of tools where we now can, at least from an enterprise point of view, understand where our data resides and what attributes it contains. I think the next flood of applications is including, I mean, the applications of AI, where we say what is the best way in which we can now utilize this data. So we have the view of what data we have. Now, what are the best ways in which we can utilize this data? And a lot of AI applications in terms of, personalization and recommendation or segmentation, or even anticipating the needs of the customer or supplier far before it actually happens. These would not really be confined to very tech companies or very advanced companies like a Google or a Facebook, but even traditional banking or healthcare. Those kind of companies are actually, those enterprises are actively looking at adopting AI and making sense of this data. And the better high quality data they can input into their models, the better accuracy they can get. And definitely the unified views play a very critical part there.
So the other thing I also am noticing is that people are using knowledge graphs as well for managing data. So this is particularly true in companies where there's many levels of data dependencies. And so if you change one data source, how does it propagate? How does it affect other applications? How do you communicate that to downstream users? So it seems like knowledge graphs are are something that people have found to be useful in this regard. The other thing, I guess, we kind of touched on is I don't know if Sonal wants to talk about this, but when you get to master data, so in my mind, master data gen has to do more with um, things like company name, customer name, location, address, uh, and so on and so forth. So kind of nouns describing your data. Uh, so there, so master data and getting to the point where you have a master data that users can trust, that also requires a lot of work. So there's a whole field called entity resolution, in fact, that is dedicated to this problem. And there's many companies in the space, but there's also the notion of how quickly do you want to have your entity resolution operate. In other words, if it's a company name and you need company names for a report that you run once a week or once a month, well, maybe it's not so important. But if it's for some anti-money laundering application where you want to make sure that someone's, Dave and David are the same person, for example, right? So you want to be able to identify and resolve these entities very quickly. So there's many startups in this area as well. So
Sonal, can you talk a little bit about the tools? Ben brought up some of the broad areas, but you mentioned tools earlier. What tools can companies use now, and what kinds of considerations should they keep in mind when they're choosing tools?
So Ben brought up two interesting areas which are actually related. One he mentioned was master data management, which is a very grown and developed field in its own way. And most large enterprises tend to have an MDM tool and a system, a functioning system in place. Secondly, the entity resolution space, where a lot of work is being done, which is predominantly in the areas of financial systems, making sense of names and addresses, and quickly finding out if the incoming record is that of something that already exists in the system. So those are two broad areas which definitely, those kind of tools which can definitely be used. I think in terms of the analytics space, particularly, the tools or the whatever methodology that you use, the best way and something that is the least cumbersome is something that sits natively on the analytic platform. That is one thing that I kind of strongly believe in, that we do not need further extraction or further loading. Let data preparation be just a part of the transformation, and immediately supply data to the data scientist. So that is one. Another area that I kind of think that is very important is that there is a huge scale of data that is coming in, and the idea behind using like a big data system here or a complete analytics stack is that the volumes are going to be big. So the tools have to be able to take care of this volume of data that typical enterprises would see, and they should not choke at a few millions or 10 to 20 millions of records, which traditional MDM systems kind of tend to not be that good at. Then in terms of the tool being able to just, the technology being able to handle the variety of data. So just as Ben was mentioning, there could be, person names, customer names, there could be organization names. So essentially there could be various kinds of, attributes and types. And to be able to handle those at scale, with newer and newer systems coming in with different kinds of schemas, I think those are broadly a few things that, if handled well, these tools can actually be great value.
So Sonal is a bit shy, but she's actually building a tool like that as well. But there's another company that offers it as software as a service by someone we all know, Jeff Jonas, right? Sensing. And I think that's more focused on kind of individuals, I guess, right? So people and names, addresses, and things like that. And by the way, any data scientist who works in industry has encountered this problem a lot, particularly when it comes to company names, right? Because someone will give you a data set with a company name field, which is a free text format, right? Because obviously there's too many companies to put on a drop-down menu. So then you'd have so many permutations of General Electric, GE Appliance, GE Finance, and so on and so forth. So you're trying to resolve these all somehow. Or even Amazon is something that I see a lot. Amazon Web Services, Amazon Inc. And so, so this is a very common problem that I think, I guess, Sonal, I don't know how you feel. I think we're at the point where a data scientist need not try to solve this problem on their own. There are solutions that they can avail of, where the people behind these solutions have spent the time to actually try to do it. And so you can try to do it using regular expressions or some rule-based system or classifier, but just leave it to the people who are focused on building these tools, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have also been, thanks for bringing that up, Ben. I was, as you said, a bit shy mentioning that. But yes, my startup, Aficx, we have an AI-based product specifically for this data mastering. And I think what I would like to say here is that there are so many variations. I think there are 2 3 different challenges when a data scientist wants to solve this problem herself. One is that there is no unique identifier. So when you are matching everything with everything, the scale absolutely blows up. I remember the first time I tried, solving this for 25,000 records, my computer froze and I just couldn't, get it to work. Then there are variations. I mean, it's not just company names. It could be addresses. It could be, HTTP colon slash slash, or just start, or not starting with HTTP in their website URL. There could be so many different variations in people names. There could be salutations. So I think getting a tool which can do that definitely could be a good way for the analyst and the data scientist to save their time. Yes.
Yeah. Otherwise, it would be a huge project, because as Sonal pointed out, you might be able to make a progress in one field, like the address, but then you've got a whole another 40 fields to clean up, right? So
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
So Sonal, how do you see these tools evolving? What do you, and the space in general evolving? What can we expect in the future?
So I think the space is very clearly defined. That is for sure. That this is a problem that people are going through as they want to make sense of their data. This is a problem which is being felt beyond a traditional MDM use case, which was more on the operational side of transforming the enterprise, making sure bad data doesn't come in. But this is now taking a shape which is more on the analytics side, just beyond the operational side. And there is going to be a lot of action here in terms of data quality, deduplication, in terms of data mastering. What I see and I kind of envision, and I really hope the field goes in that direction, is that uh, these problems kind of improve over time. So, when we start with data mastering, and I say that Amazon LLC is the same as Amazon, and then the tools keep taking the feedback and improving. So these tools, I mean, it's not just, like a one-time thing that you've prepared your data and this is done with, because the data keeps flowing in. And these tools, just beyond the scale of being able to do what they're just mastering them in one go and being static in their analysis, I think these tools would eventually be so smart that they would be able to point out that this zip does not belong to this address, or this input format is completely wrong. And when you're unifying the data, when you're saying that I want to pick up the first name from this field and the last name from this field, it would be able to say that this is probably a wrong field that you're picking up, or it would be able to say which which enterprise system to trust more based on what the user feedback is. So eventually the data quality and the data flowing in through the systems eventually would continue to increase and continue to feed better quality data into the pipeline. I think that's where we have to go.
yeah, I think, Jen, these are topics where there are a lot of smart people focused on building tools to alleviate these problems. So expect some amount of automation, as Sonal describes, will have more and more automation. I mean, this not only applies to entity resolution, but maybe even data quality, right? So the whole error detection and repair. I mean, I guess the HoloClean project out of Waterloo was an early hint as to what's possible, at least for structured data. Um, but just like any application of automation in any field, I think you'll still need humans in the loop, right? Because basically, as Sonal will attest, the people who are closer to the business know exactly what the data should look like and what to expect. And so I think while we will have better and better tools, more and more automation, I think a lot of these automation tools will be human in the loop tools.
Is there any application, or does this fit at all with what people are trying to do with unstructured data? Or is this a completely focused on structured data?
I think in unstructured data, there are also tools so at least for data labeling, right? So labeling of images, right? So this is something, Jen, you and I have talked about. Basically, in computer vision, there are tools for labeling images, and those tools themselves are getting better in the sense that they are designed to help someone label images, more and more images quickly, and also to take advantage of previous labeling decisions of users. But as far as there's not quite an analog. I would imagine, I guess the analog would be in, let's say, images. Well, I mean, I guess the face of Jenn Webb, right? So this is Jenn Webb. Jenn Webb and side view, right? So there's no. I'm not sure there's quite an analog of entity resolution in that domain. Yeah.
Right. It seems like it'd be interesting, though, if you could apply entity resolution tools to unstructured data to kind of prepare it and better structure it for then implementation into a unified view. Sonal, do you have any thoughts on that, or have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, so I think one area where this unstructured data does come into play is so you have legal contracts, or you have so through NLP you can actually extract what entities it is talking about, or the supplies that are there, and that can be linked to the structured data, to the master data.
So I guess entity extraction, right?
Entity extraction
to entity
and then resolution. Yes, I think that's where this would go in terms of typical enterprise use cases.
Now, I don't know.
All right. Well, Ben, do you have any final thoughts?
I guess, Sonal, have you heard of?
Yeah.
Have you heard?
Go ahead, Ben.
Have you heard of people doing the following? So in healthcare, in particular, there's this critical step called de-identification. Right. So basically, here's doctor notes, but I want to scrub out the patient name and any kind of thing that could be violating privacy. I wonder if if there's some kind of conversations between the people who do entity extraction and then the people who do de-identification. It sounds like, because it seems like it's somewhat related, right? So if I can identify that this is a person, I want to scrub it out of the record, right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the one topic I would say that's relevant here, Jen, that we also bring up in our 2021 trends report is data exchanges. Right? So this is so Sonal. This would be data exchanges are these platforms which match data producers with data consumers. So now you have these public data exchanges like Amazon has one, Google has one, Snowflake has one. But there's also increasingly these private data exchanges, for example, in healthcare, where because a lot of these healthcare organizations really don't have a lot of data. So they want to somehow pull their data, but there's a lot of privacy regulations around healthcare data, right? So now there's people who are trying to set up these data exchanges that somehow are able to preserve privacy. So I think this kind of master data management and wanting a real great view of your customer, if you can somehow uh, augment your data with some data from a data exchange, that's an interesting possibility for me.
Yeah, I would agree very much there. So enrichment of data in terms of your own data, internal data, getting enriched through external data, through all these data marts and data exchanges, definitely holds a lot of potential. And I think the core, one is just having exposure to the data, but obviously the data mastering and the unification is a critical step before we can actually consume this data. So that would be an interesting application as well. Yes.
And then one last thing, Jen, which is basically when it comes to the prep, which is the transformation, there's an interesting line of the caveat here. This is all research at this point. I haven't seen these in products, which is basically taking ideas from program synthesis and combining it with machine learning to do something like this. So here's my starting data set, right? So this is what I want it to look like. And so this program will automatically write Python code to take this data set and transform it to the resulting data set. So there's a proof of concept out of Berkeley called AutoPandas, which is basically here's my starting pandas data frame. This is what I want it to look like. It'll write the most optimal pandas code for you. Um, so I think that at some point that would be more and more common, which is great because that means as data scientists, the folks listening, you don't need to know all the details of pandas anymore. You know, you can just basically you can start thinking of higher level things instead of the nitty gritty of these individual libraries, right? So I think actually data transformation is is an area where this might actually work out because there you actually know what you want in some ways, right? So here's my starting data set. I want it to look like this. So uh, I think it's possible that this might happen within a couple of years that we'll start seeing more and more tools like this.
Yeah, definitely on the transformation side. I'm not sure that much on the mastering side because I think it is even more complex. But on the transformation side, show by examples and learning by examples is something that would definitely a lot more tools would start looking at. And it's going to be very exciting.
So one question for you, Sonal, since you're familiar with many non-English languages. So to what extent the things we've talked about, like entity resolution, extraction, all of these things, are most of the most bleeding edge tools only for some of these major languages like English? I mean, do they apply to other languages?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if we want to look at, a broad enterprise use case, a multinational company would have data in Chinese, they would have data in Japanese, besides English. And if we can't solve it, it would, so you would actually not be able to solve the problem if you don't do it completely. And these tools, especially like the startup I'm working on, we are able to handle different character sets and be able to master entities in Chinese and Japanese, though they are a different script altogether. But I think that's where the application of AI kind of shines, right? If you're just learning patterns, if you're learning patterns of differences, you can actually train it to be able to handle the differences across two records or two different languages. So it's not really so in our case we actually don't do the mastering between English and Hindi or English or Chinese, but between Chinese and Chinese, the same kind of models and the same technology can really work pretty well. And that seems to be pretty impressive. And I think that's the way to go.
So for our listeners there, Sonal, give us a sense of how much data do you need for some of these tools to start really excelling? Like how many examples do I need of address or zip code? Or, you know what I mean? So
Yeah, sure.
before I can actually let these be comfortable that these tools will give me something reasonable, with the caveat that you probably will want to still inspect whatever these tools produce, right? If you're going to rely on them for something mission critical.
Definitely. So I would say that if we have to do a lot of training, I mean that really kills the beauty and the benefit of applying AI to anything. So if we have to spend weeks or months, might as well just code a rule based engine. The best applications of AI tend to start with very minimal data set or label to learn from. And I think that's where like if you apply something like active learning, where instead of just blindly labeling what examples the system learns from, you can actually get the algorithm itself to point out which examples it is most confused about. So it can be pretty frugal. I mean, we can start anywhere from 50 to 100 samples and get reasonable accuracy of 85 to 90% on data sets of millions.
So Jen, this is very related to some of the things that we've been talking about UX and putting yourself in a position where you can help the machine learning to improve, right? So
Right.
as Sonal pointed out, if you have a nice UX where the analysts can help the machine learning catch mistakes or improve over time, then it'll more likely be able to do that quickly.
All right. Well, with that, thank you, Sonal. This has been a fascinating conversation.
So thank you for having me, Jen and Ben. Really enjoyed talking with both of you. Looking
Thank you.
forward to airing this. Yeah, thank you.